I'm sure that you don't want to be a know-it-all. And yet, so many of us feel the need to have all the answers. So in today's episode, we're unpacking a simple but powerful mindset shift from know-it-all to learn-it-all. This one change can transform how you lead, how you grow, and how you tackle every challenge that comes your way. You'll learn why curiosity beats certainty, how humility fuels high performance, and what it takes to build a team where people are not afraid to say, "I don't know yet." If you've ever felt stuck, pressured to perform, or unsure how to keep growing, this episode is for you. Today's guest is Damon Lembi. Damon is a 2-times best-selling author, host of the Learn It All podcast, and CEO of Learnit, a live learning platform that has upskilled over 2 million people. Drawing from his prior baseball career, Damon brings an athlete's perspective to leadership. Through his journey, he has gained invaluable insights into what helps organizations grow, how great leaders learn, and why Learn It All companies outpace their competitors every time. Now I share new episodes and other tips for managers every week, so be sure to click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. And here's my conversation with Damon. Thank you so much for joining me today, Damon. I'm super psyched to jump into what it is to be a learn-it-all, specifically because this was a new term for me. And I was like, I know what a know-it-all is, but what's a learn-it-all? So I was really excited to read your book, and I'm really glad that you're joining me today.
Well, it's an honor to be here, so thanks for having me.
So why don't we start with exactly that? We all know what a know-it-all is, or I think most of us do at least. What is a learn-it-all?
Yeah, so, I will start with a know-it-all, first of all, just in case somebody didn't. A know-it-all, they have all the answers. They have it figured out. It's their way or the highway. They always look for people to confirm their ideas, and they're pretty set in their ways. And you take the flip side of that, and you have a learn-it-all. Learn-it-all is somebody who's humble, who is open to change, realizes that they don't need to be the smartest person in the room, and they tap into other people's strengths. And they're super curious, and they always look at things like, okay, how could we get better? And who could I tap into to help us learn and grow?
I love this so much because I feel like it's part of my family culture. My grandfather, who started our family business, I think was very much a learn-it-all. He had a famous saying that still gets floated around in our business today, which is, everything I learned from someone else. And so the idea that you don't know everything and you're not expected to know everything, that you can learn from every single person you meet, whether they're a new team member on your team or a customer, but we can always be learning from other people. And I love that. And I love that you gave it language to be a learn-it-all leader.
And I think it's really important for your audience as managers. Let's take, for instance, somebody who gets, promoted into a manager role, and they might feel like, I have to have all the answers. I have to be the smartest person in the room because people won't trust me. Well, I've found, and I'm sure you have as well, is that people want to have leaders who are not afraid to say, and managers who aren't afraid to say, look, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me figure this out? And tap into their genius.
Absolutely. It's kind of frustrating to actually work for someone who thinks they know everything, especially if you're a content expertise, if you've been in your role for a long time, if you've been in the organization for a while, and you have a new boss that comes in and they think they know everything. It's so frustrating and doesn't make you feel valued, doesn't make you feel like you have anything to offer the team, and is very demoralizing.
It's demoralizing, and it's hard to connect with those types of people, right? Because you feel like, what's my purpose of even being here? They get it all figured out. I'm just here to do exactly what they tell me to do. And you really don't feel empowered either.
Exactly. All right. Well, you mentioned curiosity and being humble. Is there a mindset or an approach that we should be taking if we want to show up as a learn-it-all?
Well, I kind of developed this 4C framework when it comes to being a learn-it-all. It starts with, the gateway is really humility. I don't think if you don't have humility, then maybe just stop right there. We talked about that a lot. And then the 4 C's are character, curiosity, confidence, and courage. And I got the last two mixed up backwards, but character, do the right thing all the time, have integrity, show up. And so especially as a manager, as a leader, if you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it. Don't overpromise and underproduce. Curiosity, I think that's kind of like one of the through lines through everything. Be curious. How could I do something better? Especially these days. How could we improve this process leveraging AI? How can AI help us collaborate better together? And then when it comes to courage, because being a learn it all, some people say, do you mean you just spend all your time learning all day long? No. I mean, I might have said this to you before. Learning without doing is treason. You got to have the courage to put into action what you've learned. You can't go from one degree to the next degree, read a bunch of books, all kinds of podcasts, but not ever implement something. So if you have the courage to try something out, and implement it, you eventually build up the confidence. And that's where learning really sticks. And so that, in a nutshell, is really what I'd call a learn it all. Somebody who has the character, the courage, and the confidence to always want to learn and evolve.
I'm really glad that you mentioned two things. First is that it doesn't mean you have to be learning all the time and everything, because we do actually know some things. And so it's okay to sometimes be the expert. It's okay to sometimes know things, right? Like we don't have to always assume we know nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to know something. And but what you do know, sometimes it's also important to unlearn that, because what might have worked 5 years ago as a manager may be different now, especially with all these different generations. So you have to feel confident in the skills and the ability you have. Just always be open to seeing if there's other ways to do things. To give you an example, there's somebody on our team who's been with me for a long time. And back in the day, when he'd come up with these ideas, the first thing that would come into my mind is, this is kind of crazy. I don't think this is going to work, and I'd kind of shut it out. But as I've learned to become more curious over the years, and I don't immediately go to the no, he's come up with some pretty amazing ideas if you just are open to looking at things differently.
What do you say to someone who walks in your office and says, I have an idea, and your first thought is, I don't know about that. That's going to cost us so much time. That's like way over budget. Like this is not what we're set up to do. How do you stay open when all your instincts are to just shut it down and not waste your time?
Well, it's hard, and I've gotten better at that over the years. I'd say the Damon 15 years ago would probably be a little abrupt, and say, "Hey, this isn't going to work. That's crazy." And but the problem with doing that is then ideas won't bubble up anymore. And if you want to be a great manager or part of a great organization, you want ideas and innovation to come from everywhere, especially the frontline workers. The people who are working with your customers, or in our case, our content experts, right? You want them to be able to come to these ideas and feel like they have a psychologically safe space where they can share these ideas and they don't be made to feel stupid. So what I've always done I've tried to do is listen to everything they have to say. And I might just say something like, hey, look, I really appreciate it. This isn't exactly the direction we can go because of this reason, or this reason. But as long as they feel like that they've been heard and given a chance to share their ideas, I think that goes a long way. Now, it even goes further if every once in a while you do implement their ideas and you give them credit for what they did and you highlight it throughout your organization. And that's really a sign, I think, as well as a Learn It All leader, is a Learn It All leader is going to turn the spotlight on their team, and they're going to win through their team. I talk about that in my book, being a hero maker instead of a hero, where you get some of these leaders, and I'm sure you've experienced it, where if something goes well, they can't wait to take credit for it. And then if things don't go well, they just push the blame on somebody else. And I feel like if you have the type of culture where people feel safe and they trust they can share ideas without feeling bad, and every once in a while those ideas are heard and implemented, that's when you create a culture where people really feel like they belong and that they have purpose, and they're no longer just a paycheck player. They're not just coming there for a job.
Yes, yes. And I would imagine that part of implementing those ideas when they don't go well is not seeing them as failure, but seeing them as learning opportunities. Because if you're a learner, you can learn from every situation, even the ones that don't work out.
Absolutely. And that comes to delegation, which managers have struggle with quite often, is you delegate something to somebody and maybe you even empower them and you're there to support them. But if it doesn't go well, instead of jumping down their throat, or getting on their back because this didn't go well, how can we pivot this into a learning opportunity? What could we do differently next time? If you had to do this over again, what a different approach would you be? And that's why I think that even delegation in itself should be not framed as like, I'm just throwing this task at you or do this, but those are learning opportunities for people on your team, whether they succeed or even if they happen to fail.
Yes, actually, I feel like that I can't help but share this. I don't usually talk about my kids on the show, but my kids hate it when I'm like, all right, what can we learn from this? When something doesn't go well, or I'm like, I'm going to turn this into a learning moment. And they're like, no, mom. But it's so important because sometimes the lessons aren't necessarily obvious to everyone involved. And so if we surface the learnings together, we can kind of look at that situation and say, we can all learn something here. I can learn something about how I'm showing up as a manager. You can learn something about how you're showing up as a colleague. We can learn something about what's happening in the market or what's happening with this product or what's happening in whatever zone we're working in. But if we don't acknowledge it as a learning opportunity, then those insights can just maybe get lost along the way. So I just really appreciate that.
I love what you said about surfacing the learnings from it. Because quite often, if things don't go right, what does the manager do? They just jump in and say, you should have done this, this, and this differently. Or here, let me jump in and fix this. Where instead, if just like with your children, if you take a step back and say, okay, what can we learn from this? And you help them think it through. What you're doing is you're creating an environment and a team who could really think for themselves and make decisions for themselves. And even though it requires patience and could be challenging, in the long run, it's like going slow to go fast because you're creating a much stronger culture and environment.
Yes. All right. What else can we do if we want to create a learning culture where it's not just us who show up as learners, but really everyone has embraced this mindset of character and curiosity and courage?
And what I would say, well, first and foremost, it has to start with the leadership and the managers. So modeling that behavior, and kind of highlighting, what you are doing to being a learner yourself. Another one is what we just talked about, is giving that people opportunities and turning these into learning moments, as I like to call them as well. Because all learning doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be taking a class from Learnit or whatever, right? So, but what I like to tell organizations to do, let's say you're on a tight budget, have somebody in your organization that champions the learning, right? That this is one of their key responsibilities. And then they can go out and they can find, let's say, a great book, or have somebody come up with a book, and then do a book report or a book club. Another thing that I've seen people do is around AI is every week somebody in an organization shares a tool that they've been using and how it's been helping them get better. And maybe even bring in your friends or people outside the organization. Like I had a buddy who jumped on a Learnit call and shared how he's using Superhuman to make his email more efficient. So these are all different opportunities of how you can create learning within the organization. I also think, everybody has PTO, paid time off. I like to work with our customers and learn it. We call it learning time off. So making very intentional. So you're investing not only money sometimes, but also time for people, so they feel like it's okay to be spending their time learning. I think that if you're working 8 to 5, it doesn't mean to be doing busy work all the time. I think that they should have the opportunity to feel comfortable and want to learn. And then one of the best things you can do as well is share that back. What did you learn that you can turn around to the team again and share back what you learned?
All right. So many things that I want to pick up on. So first is learning does not need to be expensive. It can come in all different shapes and sizes and be accessible to your whole team, even if you have a tiny budget. So important, because it's really easy to think that the only way to learn is in a formal setting or at a high price. Second, that you need to give people time to learn and make that part of their job. We just don't think about that when we give somebody a job description, a list of responsibilities. It never says, and also be learning and growing in your role. But it's kind of assumed, but if we don't say it explicitly, it's easy for folks to feel like, I don't have time to read a book. I don't have time to watch an hour-long video on YouTube because I'm busy doing my work. So when you elevate it and say, actually, that is part of your work, it changes how they invest in their own development. And then thirdly, you have to maximize and optimize across the team. So if someone's learning something, they should be sharing it, right? Don't just hoard all the learnings yourself. Give your team a chance to share what they're learning, and you can share what you're learning, and you can learn from each other. What a great way to have one person read a book, and then the rest of us get the key takeaways, and now we can all be advancing together. So love all of these so much. I want to go back to something you said earlier, though, which is about the applying what you learn, because it is very easy to read a book. It's easy to listen to a podcast or watch a TED Talk. And I admit, I do a lot of those things. But it's not so easy to actually take action, especially when you're consuming a lot of content to be able to then implement it. And I feel like I know so much stuff, but that doesn't mean I'm doing all the things. What approaches or tips do you have for how we can go from just knowing things and having learned things to actually using that knowledge?
Great question. I like to read or listen with intentionality. So if I'm reading a book, I'm thinking, how can I apply this in my professional or personal life? And I used to think, maybe that I'd just read 40, 50 books a year. Well, I've kind of slowed that down. And sometimes I even reread the ones that I really enjoy, that I can get more impact out of, because otherwise you just forget 95, 100% of it. But I'll give you an example. So I recently had a guy on my podcast named Matthew Dix, who's a phenomenal storyteller. And I loved how he talks about opening up stories, start in the middle of a story. So what did I do? I did a all hands staff meeting, and I had the courage, if you want to call it courage, but I implemented his approach at the very beginning of the meeting to try to make it more interesting and exciting. And I think I give myself like an 8 out of 10 for it, but I'll continue to try it. So that's an example right there of, okay, I learned this technique or this approach. How can I apply it to my work? And then I actually did apply it. And then very important that you and I spoke about before, feedback. Then I turned around and I asked the team for feedback. What do you think went well? I think I did this part well, but maybe I didn't do this part as well as I'd like to. What do you think I could do next time? Because feedback is part of that learning culture, and it's actually fuel for learning if you learn how to be great at receiving feedback.
Okay, we could totally go down a rabbit hole on how to receive feedback, but I want to stick for a second on this action orientation to learning. And one, I completely agree that rereading books, it's one of my new favorite hobbies. I have a core set of books that I try to read every year or so because
What's one of them? Give me one.
I really love The Gap and the Gain. I can't remember the authors right now, but the basic premise is if we're always thinking about the gap between where we are and where our goal is, we will always feel like we're lacking. But if we pause and we look at the gain we've made since our last check-in and we look backwards and say, how far have I come? We suddenly feel so accomplished. And so that little shift in mindset of focusing on what we've gained every few weeks, few months, few years can just propel you forward to keep doing the things, even though your goals feel so far away, because you know you're going to make progress. But that book I've read a couple of times now, and every time I read it, I hear something different in it. Something different sticks with me, and then I take action on that thing. So it's helpful to go back and read books again. The second thing is you're talking about of reading with intentionality and capturing those specific things you want to try. I haven't done this in a while, so I'm giving myself a little reprimand that I need to start doing it again. But I used to take all my Kindle highlights and export them into a document. So I'd have a 1 to 3 page document of the key ideas from the book that resonated so that I could refresh my memory and go back to that document when I'm like, oh yeah, what did I learn about habits? Oh, here's the thing. And I wouldn't have to reread the whole book because I was too lazy.
Yeah, have you ever, so I do that with a tool called Readwise, which is awesome. So all my highlights in Kindle, they show up on this app, and then it gives you 5 a day, and I just go in and it gives a mixture of it. So at least 5 highlights a day I go through and I read, and it just helps you retain some of the stuff that you learned before.
Ooh, I'm so excited to try that out.
Check it out.
Thank you. All right, let's talk for a second about learning and unlearning, because you brought this up earlier too. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about what it looks like to kind of unlearn so we make space for learning.
Well, I look at it as, say, for instance, when it comes to sales, we always had a structure for our discovery calls. Like, this is how we always have done it. And we've learned it one specific way. Well, buyers have changed. So with buyers changing, you need to be able to, set aside some of the old and move forward with the new. So that's what I really mean by learning and unlearning is let's unlearn this process that's kind of stuck in our mind. Sometimes it could even be sunken cost fallacy. Like, we've already spent so much time doing it this way, we can't change. But with AI and the rapid pace of change, I think learning agility is like so important. And one of the most important things in learning agility is not being afraid to saying, okay, I've learned how to do things this way. Now I need to unlearn it, put it aside, and try something different and experiment and do things different. Not just always build on what you've already had, because sometimes you just need to make a pivot and take a different approach.
Yeah, someone I used to work with called this the ice to water to ice, freeze, unfreeze, freeze again, that it's really hard to reshape a cube of ice when you're rigid. So you have
Yeah,
to kind of melt, kind of let go so that you are able to kind of reconfigure into your new mode, and then you can refreeze into that mode for as long as it's helpful. And I
I
think
like
it's
that. I'm
really,
going to steal that.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's an important metaphor, just a way of thinking of letting go of those things that no longer serve us, even if they give us confidence because we know how to do them, because they've worked well for us in the past. And so we are afraid of what's coming. But you got to let go sometimes and make space for that newness and that learning that can come for the future.
I've got a great little story about that. We have an individual on our team, actually won the Employee of the Month. He came from a different industry, but he was really almost like a know-it-all, right? And he wanted to prove himself. He was in sales, and he wasn't very coachable. And every time I would tell him something, or his leader would tell him something, he'd say, I got it figured out." Well, I had to have a kind of a hard talk with him and say, "Hey, look, if things don't change, you're not going to make it here," and gave him a couple of reasons why. And 3 months later, working with the sales leader, he's doing phenomenal. And I'm not saying it was just because I had this conversation with him, but I asked him, I said, "Hey, what's changed?" And he said, "I was able to just let go of some of my ways and really kind of buy into the approach and trust Bob and you as leaders. And it's been a game changer for me." It's like I stopped worrying about thinking like I've always looked at things this way and just been open to trying things differently and putting the trust in my team. So sometimes it's nice just to even let go of that kind of control that you think you have to have all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And it sounds a little bit like maybe as adults, it's hard to be learners. Maybe it feels uncomfortable to be learners, which is why we show up wanting to feel so confident and feel like we know it all. Do you see that in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes the higher you go up the ladder, the more successful you are. Like, look how much success I had. Why do I need to keep learning? Well, the truth of the matter is, with your show and with my podcast, the greatest leaders that I brought in, they tend to be the most humble and the most curious, who always want to continue to learn. So I think it runs the gamut. You get these people who are like, you know what, I'm tired of learning. I don't need it. I've got it all figured out. But even people who are maybe even passed into retirement will tell me, "Hey, it's what keeps me young, is this curiosity and learning from everybody around me," which is, I think, is amazing.
Do you have a phrase you love? Because I'm thinking like, can't teach an old dog new tricks, but really like, we got to get rid of that concept. Is there something you would replace it with?
I would, I don't know. I mean, I always kind of say, which I might have already said already, learning without doing is treason. I mean, that's one of my favorite phrases when it comes to learning. But can't teach a dog new tricks. I mean, that's I don't know. I got to come up with, don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all, I guess. But yeah.
Perfect. Sorry to put you on the spot. It just that popped into my head and I was like, oh, I've heard that so many times. Well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm like, no, we got to get rid of that concept. It's not true. Everyone can learn all their life long. All right. Well, we do have to start to wrap up. So, Damon, can you tell us about a great manager you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
So my career is a little different because I went straight from being a baseball player into work at Learnit. So and my manager that really sticks out for me was my coach that I had at Arizona State named John Pearson. And what I was so grateful to have him for is that he was always there for me. He had my back, but he also pushed me and wasn't afraid to have difficult conversations with me. But he would stick up for me to our head manager if I was benched for some reason. So he was always there for me. He always stuck up for me, but he'd tell me like it is. And on top of it, he believed in me more than I believed in myself. Like I thought I was a good baseball player, but he said, "Hey kid, you could really take this to the next level. You could be a big leaguer," which I didn't make it to the big leagues. But having somebody with that kind of experience and background, with all these other kids around, really putting that belief in you, I guarantee I was a better baseball player from it. And I'm a better leader now myself from having somebody who was like that in my life.
Yes, a lesson we can all learn. We have to have confidence in our people, and sometimes we have to show them what they're capable of because they don't see it for themselves. So beautiful.
I think that's one of the main responsibilities of a manager and a leader is to help people understand the greatness they have in themselves before they even see it themselves.
Absolutely. And tell us about your podcast and your book and where we can learn more about you and keep up with your work.
So Mamie was a guest on my podcast. It's the Learn It All podcast. So check it out. And my book is the Learn It All Leader. I also have one, the Learn It All Leader for kids. So if you have a kid between the ages of 4 and 8, you might want to check it out. It's pretty cool. And connect with me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and Damon Lembi on LinkedIn. And my company is learnit.com.
Well, thank you again so much, Damon. Such a pleasure to learn from you today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.